Thank you, Jeff. I didn't quite expect to have to deliver you such a verbose introduction or such a personal challenge as trying to find a lift home this afternoon, but thanks for the intro. Ko kaitahu toko, ko kaitahu tanakwe. Hello, everybody. Really glad to be here today, and really want to celebrate what Thriving Southland have done. I mean, to have such local energy and such local drive to bring together this discussion around, what is tech doing for us today? Where is it going? What's it going to mean for on our farms, across our orchards, for the food and fibre sector as a whole from New Zealand? And globally, what does that mean? What does that mean for New Zealand, and what does that mean for other parts of the world? So really glad to be able to be here and have some of this discussion, and for you guys to sort of engage with who's here. Who would have known that as we've been doing what New Zealand does best in growing the food and fibre that the world needs and the world demands, and we're so famous for being able to deliver, that at the same time we would have been delivering the technologies and the processes for doing that that allow us to do that really well, and the world is also looking for in terms of how do we meet some of these global challenges of growing populations, of growing food in very demanding circumstances, with planetary constraints coming to bear. The world is asking for us, not just for our food and fibre, and it wants our food and fibre and wants more of it, but it also needs the knowledge and skills that we've got in doing that to be able to do that at a global scale. There was a massive opportunity for New Zealand to be doing all that we do and a hell of a lot more, so that our kids and our future generations have multiple options for how we pay for what New Zealand needs and how we have New Zealand's best impact for the world. So at Agritech New Zealand, we're all about sort of connecting and promoting all of the different moving parts that are coming together around this agri-tech sector. So that includes the great resources we've got in New Zealand around our research capabilities, our universities, our CRIs, the ag researchers, the plant and foods, and all of those organizations. It's the innovators who are coming, many of them coming off farm, having really understood what the challenges are and what needs to happen and how we can improve things. It's the enablers around those, the investors, the companies that understand how to grow innovations, get the funding into them, make them, help them get applied properly, and help them get out into the world. So, a real ecosystem of interrelationships and sort of shared perspectives that need to come together to both deliver the value on farm, but also find that additional value that can be found internationally. So at Agritech New Zealand, we look at making those connections, promoting the sector, and looking at advancing the sector in that way. We do that through our members, many of whom are presenting here, either presenting and showing here today, and that's a wide ecosystem of players. We do that by persisting a lot of global partnerships, which helps sometimes bring technologies in this way, sometimes help us justify larger levels of investment in terms of those technologies than we might be able to justify if we were just investing for our local needs here in New Zealand. To the same extent of how many farms would we have, how much of an investment would we put into our farms if we were only supplying the domestic market? The industry would look very differently. The same thing happens in terms of our agri-tech businesses. We want the best technologies, and we want the best technologies first and faster here in New Zealand. We need to develop those with a global mindset so that we're justifying bigger investments and going global. So that's a lot of what we're involved in. We know the value that agri-tech can deliver and is delivering to the primary sectors here. This is numbers coming from MPI when they look at what's required in terms of doubling our exports and responding to the current government's demand for looking at how we do double exports and what's going to be required to do that in terms of increasing level of value, getting to the markets that will pay more, looking for reducing imports, looking for bigger improvements. So these are all of the gains that we see sort of happening and needing to happen locally. Agritech is sort of a two-for-one deal, though, as well as delivering what's needed in terms of primary industries productivity and new options and being able to do what's needed on farm and on orchard better. It also delivers productivity for New Zealand as a whole, because we start generating new options for ourselves in addition to what we do with our primary industries it kicks us into what's happening globally in terms of the knowledge economy and what we can do with our systems and our IP, the intellect that we're building on farm, the understanding of where these technologies fit. And so we end up creating this new product class, in addition to our dairy and our dry stock and our horticultural outputs. We've got new outputs in terms of the systems and the IP that can be developed here first, used here first, gain first mover advantage here, and then deliver other options, other forms of GDP and income, other forms of jobs for everyone who's coming off farm or whose families have been coming off farm, and yet they want to apply things in new ways. So we see a really interesting ecosystem and great potentials for New Zealand around what Agritech means. And I love this picture. It shows our place in the world. I look at it and I feel like waving up from the bottom of the south there when we see ourselves in this type of position, looking out into the world. And Jeff mentioned, my homeland. I consider myself a conscious Kiwi after being here for 25 years and raising 3 kids here. And this is where I want to live, and this is where I choose to live and raise my family. I'm also a proud Irishman. Those two things live very easily for me. And sometimes Ireland gets talked about in terms of its level of success and the options that it's created for its economy and for its people, and New Zealand gets compared to that. Those are all, as well as any country comparisons between different players. What's really interesting, I think, in terms of things that have worked well for Ireland is Ireland understanding its sense of place, where it sits in the world, western seaboard of Europe, entry point for the States into Europe, history with the States. And so a lot of the economic success and other things that have gone well in Ireland is from understanding that place. When we look at this place, I think some things are really important. One, we can see where that awesome productive land is. We can see where those awesome playgrounds are. We can see why we would all be here. The other factors that come to bear is the mix of skills and resources that we have here. Without subsidies, we've seen our farmers and our growers be entirely professional in what they do. They are the All Blacks of farming globally. They lead the way. They know how to continuously improve. They respond to challenges. They always have done. They've transformed themselves many times over. Dairy industry over the last 40 years, many other changes. And so the world looks at that, and that's been enabled by, again, a complete ecosystem of capabilities here. It is our farmers and our growers. It is the researchers and the farm advisors. It is the innovators, and it's all the enablers, the banks, the funders, the agribusinesses that have grown and how they interact and what they do together, especially in their collaborative plays recently. And so it's that combination of capabilities that sit on these shores that's really interesting. And what's really interesting is both what we can generate here and take out into the world, but also what the world looks in terms of, what leadership is possible from these 2 small islands at the edge of the world that are contained and yet fully resourced. And the world is looking at us. The world, especially when it comes to our livestock systems and challenges in terms of planetary boundaries and what happens there, and how do we continue developing our livestock systems at a time when we're also very conscious about the emissions and the external costs that come with that. And New Zealand is leading the way in terms of how to go about doing that. It's not easy. It requires investment, and it's a challenge. But it's an opportunity for New Zealand to, again, just continue playing that All Blacks role of being the best in the world and getting benefit from doing that, not just by continuing to sell and gain benefit from our food and fiber, but by being able to get benefit and bring the benefit back from what they call these weightless assets, the knowledge and the IP and the systems that can generate further income for New Zealand, further options for employment, and further security in making sure we continue to live the good life here in New Zealand, which I've been enjoying so much. And so when you look at what makes that up, when you think of what Agritech in New Zealand really looks like, it's very broad. You let your eyes travel across this picture, and yes, of course, we have our livestock and we have our pastoral systems that are so fundamental. But we have aquaculture, of course, we have our horticultural systems, we have everything that you could imagine, and they're all sort of mini representatives of what's happening globally in terms of production systems in other parts of the world. Sometimes there's unique aspects to it, our pastoral systems, but more and more, we're finding that what we have here is mini models of what the world is trying to achieve in its food production systems. So we really have an ideal test bed for multiple things. We also have, of course, the technologies that you see applied here, whether they're in the sky at different levels, satellite on our drones, which you'll see here, whether it's in the ground, whether it's in our science systems, in our labs, and more, it's a growing level of capabilities that are covering many different growing systems and lots of different value potential. We have that rich ecosystem is made up of about 800 entities, in New Zealand that are directly related to Agritech businesses. Of course, you've got it's lost in white there, but somewhere, of course, the technology companies, there's sort of, about 400, 450 actual, what you would think Agritech companies. You see many of them represented here today. And then you've got all those other enablers around that and those companies, whether it's the investors, the research groups, the services and service providers around those type of businesses that help growing this industry. Another great asset, of course, and it's fundamental to all of this, is just the way farmers and growers have been engaging with these technologies. Engaging because many of them are created by the sons and daughters who are coming off farm. And so when we look at the levels of adoption that we have in technology already here in New Zealand, that's a very different profile than what you will find in other parts of the world. So people are reaching out and using these tools in very pragmatic ways. When we talk about our business management tools, whether that's the tools that Farm IQ, Figured, and all of these businesses, the level of usage of those digital tools in terms of business development is extremely high in New Zealand. That's a great base. And I'll talk a little bit as we go through this about, what does this mean in terms of where the progress is. So again, when we look at our place in the world and look here, we know that we've got 5 million people. We know that potentially we have the capacity to feed 40 million people, so it drives our export market. But of course, if we feeding 40 million people would actually probably be looking, basing things on a commodity basis. The drive has always been to go for more value, and the value is around rather than just volume. So there is the potential to feed 800 million people for 5% of their diet, and that's where the greater value comes from the food and fiber sector. But of course, we're living on a planet that has 10 billion people that are going to need to be fed, single planet with all those constraints. All of these global factors, and the fact that New Zealand is unarguably on the planet, means that there's a role for New Zealand to play in terms of how do we get to those higher levels of value in terms of not just feeding 5% of the diet of 800 million, which will mean growth and that we're going to find from our current food and fiber, but also meeting all those other challenges in terms of what Agritech and the solutions that we can jointly develop bring to the market. Globally, when you look at what's happening in Agritech, this slide is probably 6 or 7 years old now, and I think you'll agree that you wouldn't find actually much farming capability sitting in Silicon Valley and London or in New York City or Boston or Los Angeles. What you do find is a massive level of investment, global money, knowing that these are existential problems for the planet and the people that we're trying to feed. And so massive money has gone there. And so what we're doing here, both in terms of our food systems and the technologies around our food systems, the world is looking for. Of course, what's interesting is there's been some reality checks as other parts of the world sort of understanding that, investing in agri-tech is not quite the same as investing in what they call fintech or financial technologies or medical technologies. There are some genuine challenges that are felt at the coalface, and that you would all probably experience yourselves in terms of you can't just turn tech on It needs to find its place within growing systems. It needs to find its place in terms of seasons of change, and there's a natural pace to that, which means it's different than other sectors. So we have seen sort of, peaks and trends of where investment money is going. Everything now is talking about where AI, what that's going to mean for humanity, how that's going to create, sort of more impact for humanity than the internet has, and that level of change is coming down our pathways. We'll talk a little bit about that. And so there's a big change in terms of where money is going, but New Zealand is finding its place. So we, in addition to our reputation for food and fibre, our reputation for this understanding of where technology fits is also growing in reputation. So what does that mean here today? What we have on show, the reasons that we've come together. We're looking at, where are we starting and what's happening. We see, increasing amounts of technology being available to us, commercially available through the players that we have here today and the other players in the market, happening internationally as well. Those technologies, are delivering real value today. They're enabling new capabilities. But there's also sort of an overall change effect that's happening as we embrace these new ways of doing things, the new data that's coming through, the new ways of measuring things, and understanding, what does data mean? And I believe we've got some sessions to explore that later on today. And so there is more data being created. We see that volumes of data coming through. We see more platforms where you can access that data. So we're seeing the farm IQs, the Figureds, the Minders, all these other tools that are presenting immediate value, but also gaining sort of massive data sets and massive understanding sitting beside them. And that has much future meaning. So we find those values, we find value being delivered today. It's happening right now in terms of, new ways of making decisions and getting insights to what's happening on farm, being much more specific in how do we address this health issue? How do we reduce inputs here? How do we, how do we get new insights from everything that we know and we've sensed and we've learned, and putting some quantification on that and finding out, what does it mean to be able to manage what you measure. And so we see all of these needs being used. We see many of the providers who are enabling that in the room here today. And so that's sort of the first point of contact. I've often been interested when we sort of use a term like adoption around technologies, and you think of where else that term adoption is used. It's a very personal connection. I'm not saying that adopting technology within your business is the same as adopting a child, but there is no doubt that there is a relationship that you're forming with the technology provider, with the new capabilities that are coming into your business, and that relationship is a shared journey. It's around, how do you find value and new levels of capability within whatever challenges, whatever the limiting factors happen to be within your business right now. Who are the partners that can help you explore that? And these are the type of businesses that you find in the room here today. These are businesses whose job it is to make sure that they're enabling savings on farm, enabling new ways of connecting with the value systems that you're part of, enabling cost reductions, enabling new levels of capability. So that's where it starts. What gets really interesting, and Jeff sort of introduced us in terms of what does that mean going forward? If that's where we're starting with the players who have capability to engage with you today, capabilities that you're already exploring on farm. That range of data that is becoming available is exactly the fuel, the oil that's needed for this new wave of prediction machines, or artificial intelligence as it's called. You will see elements of that in many of the solutions that you explore today. So it's getting talked about in the press a lot. It's the current trend in terms of investments. The realities of it is already being embedded in many of the products and services that are being developed by the players that are exhibiting here today and the developments that they're doing, both in terms of how they run their own businesses, how code is being written, how progress has been made in working through biological samples to find the best solutions and the best offerings going forward. But also in terms of the services that are being brought to your own businesses and the insights and decision support that can be done. So these capabilities are emerging from these sort of shared perspectives on what does this technology mean, what does this availability of data mean. And when we try and predict the future on that, I think the truth is that the best way to predict the future is to be part of it. There's a great saying that the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. I think globally the distribution of technology insights around agriculture is potentially well biased to the capabilities we've already got in New Zealand. In other words, I believe we have a natural competitive advantage already because we have professional farming and growing systems and all the resources that I've talked about that can come together to really sort of make sense of what does data really mean. So in terms of today and where it goes, I give full credit for Thriving Southland for responding to the local need and to find out more. I think it's great how all of the presenters who follow and the exhibitors who are here are ready to engage in discussions and talk about what does that mean today? What are the limiting factors happening in your business, and what are the tools and technologies that can help you shift things along in the next couple of seasons? And having a context for that, what that interrelationship and dependence is as their businesses thrive and grow alongside yours, all those new capabilities are there for New Zealand to get further value as well. So I would say engage with everyone who's here already, have a talk to them around what are the problems they're looking to solve, matchmake where things are within your business, and know that it's building to a larger capability for the sector as a whole and for New Zealand's options. So well done for joining today. I look forward to more discussion. And as Rachel said, if you've downloaded the Slido application or you just want to shout out, happy to answer any comments, answer any questions or take any other comments.
Yes, round of applause for Brendan. We've got a couple of questions here.
Good.
So yes, thanks guys. I can see a couple of questions coming through. So ideally, I'll read them. I hate reading and talking at the same time. It's the worst. But you had some awesome sort of keynotes in there, and I'd just love to say I like that the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed, and that's what I guess today's all about. That networking, asking the hard questions. So, do you have a view on data ownership?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think data ownership is an interesting one. So. Owning data and being able to do something with data are sometimes two separate things. I think fundamentally the point of creation of data is where data should be owned. So there should be an innate right for farmers and growers to own data. That means nothing unless that data gets used. So we need to look at how farmers and growers get recompensed for what they enable, both in terms of what happens on farm and within orchards, but happens further down the value chain as well. There is no doubt that there is a lot of change and emphasis being done of new practice on farms where there are many benefits off farm, and that needs to find a rebalance, and that has to find a rebalance. That means obviously payment for environmental services over time. That also means where there is value from data, that there is some connection and options around that. Having said that, if we waste and we have conversations around ownership and try and wrap our arms tightly around it, we won't necessarily find those additional values as well. So I think there's been a code of practice that's been supported by ourselves, by groups like the Agri-Data Syndicate, which FarmIQ and others have been, which fundamentally starts is that farmers own their data. I guess all I'm saying is ownership means nothing unless there's ways found to get further value from that data, potentially beyond the primary usage.
Yeah, we've had in the catchment group space a lot of data come through and lots of farmers using data, but it's finding people to help interpretate it as well and turn it into something that we can do action with. So,
and knowing that capability needs investment and needs opportunity to flourish as well. Because it's so there's sort of owning the core data from I guess. In other terms, you've things like got consumer data rights, and knowing that the data that's fundamentally describing your business it should be owned by you, and you should have control around that. We see that changing with the banks now as they look at open banking standards and being able to shift the data around your financial operations of the business, having control around how that's used and accessed. I see the same thing happening across all operational data in the farm. So there is basic control of that, while still enabling all the innovations that need to happen.
Cool, awesome. I've got a couple more questions here for you, Brendan. So where do you see the value of the information that farmers provide sitting?
Well, I guess, the physical, well, you can take that question at multiple levels. So there are real challenges in terms of, where do those physical storage systems fit, and how do you power them? Those are real challenges. I think it sits wherever it can generate further value. So fundamentally it needs to sit within on farm for primary usage, within the value chain for usage across the value chain, but then many other places. So physically, where it's going to sit? Well, in a network age where we have more and more systems joining together, it gets harder and harder to where that physically sits. That brings the challenge of real data sovereignty and what New Zealand does in terms of its storage systems and control over that. But yeah, bigger questions that I can probably answer on stage right now. But happy to talk to anybody about that in terms of what sovereignty means, as well as just some of the storage challenges.
Cool. What percentage of IP is developed in New Zealand but lost to overseas due to lack of investment or restrictions on GM tech?
I don't have a number, but probably more than we would like. I think I think there is. There's we're working in a global ecosystem, and so we need to be welcoming of foreign investment, and but what we want is that foreign investment to be something that's adding to the productive capacity here. So a big discussion with the current government is wanting to be open for business and wanting to look for foreign direct investment coming this way. It's very good to be open for business, but when you open your business, you need to be clear on exactly what it is that you're selling. And I think what New Zealand has to sell is something that's not a transaction that gets taken away. It's an engagement with what happens globally. So I think we have seen IP lost from New Zealand. But I think equally, we see New Zealand engaging and gaining IP internationally, and I see real potential for us to engage with those markets differently. Sometimes if you try and hold on to something too tightly, though, as well, you just end up smothering it. So I think you need to take some of those arguable losses and figure out how you turn them into an advantage. I've seen some interesting examples from Ireland, where there's been technology companies that have been nurtured in Ireland, funded by the government, supported by the government, and then they get acquired by an overseas business. The Irish response is not to stop the relationship at that point. It's to go, okay, if there's foreign ownership of that business, how do we encourage that business to be doing further investment in Ireland, to be doing more R&D in Ireland, more developing, and that you continue gaining benefit from persisting that relationship rather than just thinking it's a transaction. So I think questions like that one are about how do we engage globally. Yeah.
Cool. Couple more questions for you there, Brendan, before we run out of time. Who is working on data standardisation to ensure smooth sharing of information with approved entities?
Lots of work has been done in that place, and some of it has been successful, and some of it hasn't been successful. So, data standardization is an interesting concept in a world where we now have lots of unstructured data and lots of structured data. And so standards help you structure data, but if we waited for all data to be structured, we wouldn't be driving all of the AI devices and machines that are happening. So there is good work being done in terms of sharing data definitions and aligning those up. There is good work in terms of matching with international standards in terms of smart farming systems. There's been work done locally here with groups like the Agritech Syndicate to look at how data can be shared and integrated here. Ultimately, I think it's looking at how the new ways that data is being transacted.
Yeah, it's a big question. This is a big topic. We've got not enough time to answer all these questions, so I'm just trying to see if anyone's giving some extra likes. But is there any danger that agri-tech development creates more means of regulating or policing on farm development and systems?
I agree with Jeff's opening comments that I think, ultimately markets are going to be moving faster than regulators, and technologies allow farmers and growers to respond to market conditions. And so I see it happening the other way around. Regulators won't really be able to keep up with what's happening, or going to have to respond to what technology enables in terms of market values rather than the other way around.
Cool. And last one, what do you see as the main in-country barriers to Kiwi farmers being fully engaged in agri-tech adoption?
I don't know. I mean, there are always barriers around the journey that's required to find the right sort of fit between what a business needs and what the technology provides. So I still consider, as with all the progress that we've got, we're sort of babes in the wood in terms of making sure that we've got the right return on investment from technologies and the right supports. Getting to a point where adoption brings prices down, where there's more understanding of exactly how to make things work on farm, those are not barriers necessarily, but they're improvements that happen as we sort of go through this capability development.
Awesome. No, thank you very much, Brendan. You've obviously got the answers to all these questions, and as you can see, there's many questions left unanswered, but we do have to move on to our speakers. So can we please have a big round of applause for Brendan?